If you think you can't bear another film about COVID-19, I get it. But I encourage you to make an exception for the latest work by the Chinese-American director Nanfu Wang. I'm Tom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Nanfu Wang grew up in China and emigrated to the United States 10 years ago in her 20s to attend film school. She debuted with the film Hooligan Sparrow, about a Chinese dissident that caused Nanfu to get her first taste of pressure from Chinese authorities. She talked about the experience 2 years ago on Pure Nonfiction, episode 115.
I think the first shocking moment was the week after I went back to China and started filming the protest. And my family suddenly called me and asked, "What are you doing? Where are you?" The national security agents called and asked all about you. And they had no idea where I was. And that was when I realized I was being monitored. And they even reached out and discovered who I was, who my family was, and contacted them. And so fast forward to 3 months later when I finished filming, the day before I left to China, I was interrogated by the national security agents for 5 hours. And I lied to them. I secretly recorded their interrogation and put part of the interrogation in the film.
That was her first film, Hooligan Sparrow. Her next project in China was One Child Nation, about the country's policy to limit childbirth. She directed the film with Zhaolin Shang and was again subjected to heavy surveillance. For her next projects, Nanfu was focusing outside of China, but that changed in January 2020 when Nanfu was visiting her mother in China. The plan was for Nanfu to leave her 2-year-old son with her mother while she took a work trip to the Sundance Film Festival to be a juror. But when Nanfu arrived at the festival, news was breaking from China that the city of Wuhan was going on lockdown for the coronavirus. Nanfu's husband, Michael Shade, got on the next plane to bring their son back. Nanfu became obsessed with what was being reported about the virus in Chinese media and which voices were being censored. She hired several Chinese camera people to be her eyes on the ground in Wuhan and set up a careful system to get footage safely out of the country. Her new film is called In the Same Breath, and it's different from other COVID documentaries that take a more observational approach. Nanfu synthesizes a vast number of sources to create a penetrating essay about government control of information, both in China and in the United States. Her analysis looks at missed opportunities in those critical early months that might have changed the course of the disease. The film is produced by her previous collaborator, Zhaolin Shang, and co-edited by Nanfu's husband, Mike. The film is now available on HBO Max. I started our conversation by asking Nanfu about the pressure she's experienced on her past films and what she prepared for this time.
There were a lot of things that I learned during the making of A Hooligan Sparrow and the One Child Nation. I think they both prepared me and the team, and Jalen is working with me on this one too. The team to take as much precautions as possible when we were doing in the same breath, whether it's encrypted messages or building platform that's encrypted for footage transfer. But still, I would say this was surprising to all of us in terms of the level of censorship and restriction and surveillance that Wuhan, the government, and the Chinese government, central government put on in Wuhan, that made the making of the film extremely challenging. I've never experienced this level of censorship, both from the government and from the people themselves. It was the first time. And I only anticipate going forward making a documentary film that's political or just about social issues in China would be more and more difficult if the take is critical.
So among the different challenges you're going to be facing on this project, you've got people on the ground who you've contacted remotely and enlisted to work for you. What were things that they were experiencing, or what were things that you had to caution them about? Or maybe you didn't have to caution them because they were well aware of what the challenges were.
Well, we ended up having so many cinematographers, and they all had different political views, and it's a pretty wide spectrum. And someone on one end of the spectrum would be complete patriotic, complete pro-government, and thinking everything the Chinese government does was really good and wouldn't do anything that they think would make the government look bad. And we have somebody on the other end of the spectrum really from have years of activism experience and had seen all the cover up and the issues that we've seen during the pandemic as well. So it's like talking to this range of people and telling them to work on the film. It really it's a very delicate conversation. So with the people pro government, even by me introducing who I am and where I live, it's a delicate conversation to start by saying where I came from and how I became a documentary filmmaker and what my goal in making documentary films are, rather than just to say, hey, my name is Nanfu Wang, and I made Hooligan Sparrow One Child Nation. I couldn't even mention those because I don't know how people would react to films like Hooligan Sparrow and One Child Nation if they are a complete pro-government. So there was one case, one camera person, he used to be in the military. And I knew that anybody who was a soldier who had gone through the military experience could be extremely pro-government because that's the type of education and information they received. So when he started working on this project, I was very concerned. I told him, like, I assigned tasks that are not sensitive at all. Like, go film the drone shots of the city, go film this celebration of the government. And then after months we worked together, we talked more and more, and I felt I should tell him more about myself. So one day I gathered, just like I thought this was time. I told him, hey, you know what? I made a film before and it's called Hooligan Sparrow and it's about this. Would you be interested in watching it? I will be sending you a private link. And I sent, and then my feeling is either he would quit working on this or the trust is built enough that I didn't believe that he would go report to the authority, which I wouldn't have told them in the first conversation because that was one of the concerns. But after seeing it, he was like, oh my God, I never knew this. And this is a new to me. And he wanted to see One Child Nation. And I sent it to him. And then after that, his previous experience is mostly working like in commercial and getting paid wedding videography and things like that, commercial. And after this, he's like, I wanted to do independent documentary. Can you tell me like how to get into how to do this? Like this is what is meaningful. And then what I've done before, like I don't care anymore. And I just wanted to do this. And since then, I've introduced him to help other independent documentary filmmakers making films, and he wanted to do himself. So that is like taking a chance because I never know. And there are cinematographers that never turn around. That the only motivation they would be working on this film is they charge 3 times higher, like their standard rate. They were like, okay, we want to get paid more, and that's the sole motivation. We want to make money out of this because of our access. And then there are other people, the activists, more savage activists turned cinematographers now take on more of like learn how to use camera and to become a documentary filmmaker in a way.
So, knowing how much pressure you've faced in the past, you've described the last time I interviewed you the way the government would pressure not only you but also your family members for the films that you had made. I wonder, what kind of thought you put into the people who are now collaborating with you and pressure that they might experience, or for that matter, people who are in the film, some of them who give their names in the film.
Yeah, so one thing that I learned from making One Child Nation, and I think somehow from Hooligan Sparrow as well, is the government after One Child Nation was out, never went to anybody who appeared in the film other than my family members. And the reason to come to my family members was to try to indirectly threaten me or send a message to me. But they never talked to anyone who was featured in the film. And I thought about why, and for in the same breath, it's the same. So far, no one who appeared in the film had been contacted. And if you looked at it, it's really piece by piece, that story the person told is not sensitive, it's not critical, it's not subversive. And there are like a few people, Payan, one guy who was, but he made a decision. He was on BBC, he appeared on a lot of Western news to do that. And he's been contacted by the government all the time. And the rest of the people, people like the clinic owner, the regular people, the stories they told are not analytical. They shared their experience. And then in the end, they arrived at the conclusion that our government did everything they could and the best they could. And they praised the government. So I think even if the authority got a hold of this film and saw it, they recognize that. They recognize what made the film critical is the editorial choices of how you juxtapose information rather than the pieces of information itself alone. So I think that's one of the reasons that the people, ordinary people, appeared in the film are safe in a way. And the collaborators did, several of them got in trouble during the making of the film, being contacted by the government when they realized they were working with me on the film. And some of them had to quit this project and give the authority everything they knew at the time. And some of them, one, the most savage activist turned documentary filmmaker, she continued working now on other projects that are sensitive as well. Um, it's one decision we made is also by limiting how much each collaborator knows. So if they knew just that piece they are filming, then if they were questioned, there is reasonable deniability that they don't know what the rest of it is. And they can give the authority everything they know, and it's not incriminating to them.
At some point, you became aware that the government did know you were making a film and were putting some pressure on people to stop it. How did that, or did that, change the way you were going about making the film, or did that threaten to disrupt, sources of information, or the way you gathered footage?
Yeah, so that happened in March, April, and May in different times. March was the first person who got questioned, and we were like, wow, where did this information leak and how did they find out? And of course, the first thing we did is to transfer every cloud storage where we collaborate encrypted message platform, complete delete everything, all the and then start a new platform from somewhere else, and disable all the email addresses that we've been using. And I wasn't using my personal, like none of us was using our personal account to communicate on this. It's all a new one that we set up. So a new set of establishing a new set of communication, and that person didn't work on this anymore, and it's the person's choice. Or that person's email was given to the authority, so we knew who are exposed, and then we told those people, and then they stopped working, and we had a discussion if the other person is being contacted, what that person would tell the police. But for some reason that they didn't contact any further. That was it, like that end. And then when the next person being contacted, we did the same. We cut down, we kind of evaluate what the authority knew at that point, and then cut off of all of the communication on that end, and then start something new and evaluate, okay, they know this is compromised and we need to give up on this end. Yeah.
I mean, you obviously have a degree of protection being based in the U.S. That you don't have to, fear a lot of the things that you would if you were actually working in China. But I assume that you still must carry a lot of, stress about the people who you're working with, and the future of the project itself. And I mean, I wonder if you can talk about, how you handle those feelings of knowing that that a government as powerful as China is kind of working against you in trying to make your film?
During the production and the post-production and release are different type of worries. During the production, it's more of like, would the collaborators be okay? Would they be in trouble? How can we prevent that as much as possible? How can we both like taking risks, but at the same time taking only calculated risks? Um, and and then post after the release, the more of the threads focused on my family, and that does each time it gets more real. Like I feel like each film is a step further, and the threads is more real than the last time. And I often just discuss with Mike, my husband too, is like, is this film worse than the last one to the government? Are they taking it more seriously? Because, One Child Nation is about policy, no longer about one individual women's rights activist. And this one is unfolding, and is they care so much about the image right now. Is it getting worse? And their threats to my family is getting more and more aggressive, and that does give me pause in terms of like, what could I do next, or can I do something? And my family putting pressure on me too. Right now, my family would beg me not to do anything more and not to make any film. So it does affect my decision making in terms of like what to do next, and how to make a decision, which I still don't know yet. Um, and that part is unknown. But in terms of the collaborators, since the release and since the finish of production, so far I've been feeling good. And if they haven't contacted them yet, it pretty much, I don't think it will. And we did the contract, the payment were not sent to the directed person. So there is no trace of their real names. It's all like third person, fourth person until you finally get to the right person. So if anything, they wouldn't be able to find who that person is.
It's like you have to develop CIA level skills of,
Sometimes I found it ironic because we are not criminals, but the activity that we are doing almost seem like money laundering, and sending it like it goes through 4 rounds until to the final destination. It was ironic that.
I want to ask you about one theme in the film, which is your analysis of the way China, let's start with them, felt the need to tell positive stories and to couch their efforts in a propaganda campaign. And you talk about the danger of emphasizing positive stories is that it can be a distraction from facing harder truths. But I wonder about the motives for China to tell positive stories about its efforts to control coronavirus, in light of the fact that the Trump administration and a lot of U.S. policymakers were seeking to blame China, and that it does become kind of a um, a xenophobic dynamic of blaming China for coronavirus, and in that context, maybe there is some value to telling positive stories about what China was trying to do. So I wonder how you think about those things.
Well, it's really interesting because if the film is about China alone, if in the same breath is solely purely focused on China, I can see how the film would be taken advantage by a lot of anti-Asian people, and immediately grab onto it and say, look, that is true. China is all their fault, and they did horrible things. And I think that's why when the outbreak hit the US in March, I immediately and first like was confronted by all the questions, and then two, also immediately recognized that it's very important to include the US as well. I think it was unfortunate that both countries have taken on this competition and almost a propaganda competition in a way to say, look, we did better in one way and you did worse in another way. Therefore, our system is better. And that created a huge misunderstanding between the Chinese people and American people because their leaders have been promoting that narrative and which inspire the nationalism within its own country domestically. It's almost like um, by pointing at the target to the other country to look at the other country, it avoids the examination of its own problems. Um, so I think um, looking at its own issues doesn't have to compare and contrast, doesn't have to say, well, China did good in this part, or because by focusing and approving that, it is it is encouraging authoritarian um, government. It is to say, well, I can see some value in this, therefore we can forgive or overlook what had gone wrong. It doesn't have to be that way by acknowledging all the mistakes that in different countries we all made in the world. Doesn't have to say we should look at what is good, because I don't think that is good. The positive image that is being built is exactly what the narrative of the Chinese government wanted the world to see, and then therefore to ignore what led to that problems and only focus on how they have solved some of the issues in a way. And that's a false narrative to me.
I mean, you referred to the way in which this started out as a film about China, then became a film about the U.S. Alongside China as coronavirus moved to the U.S. And I wonder what it was like for you shaping this film, you know, with a constantly changing story. When did you reach a point where you felt like, okay, I can create a narrative around this that isn't going to look outdated a month after the film comes out?
It was May last year that I felt no matter what happened afterwards, this is the central theme of the film. And I know this is a film. And to me, it wasn't a film trying to track how COVID developed and how many death tolls we have had in the world. It's not about when vaccine would come out or whether the vaccine rate would be how much. Um, in March, the film experienced the major shift, which I became fascinated in understanding my own biases towards China, towards the US, and trying to understand why this would have happened in a democratic country that I would never imagine it would happen. So the rest of the filmmaking was trying to answer that question. And to me, it has nothing to do with COVID, the virus itself. It's more of the politics behind all of this and trying to understand what led us to where we are politically. And I was looking for answers through filmmaking. And I feel like in April and May is where I found those answers, and which is looking at the misinformation and disinformation and how invisible, but yet how just how fast it spreads in the US as well. And it's as dangerous as the virus, if not more so, more dangerous than the virus, but shares some of the same quality of being invisible, being, extremely contagious, and takes from one person to spread to another person, and soon it spreads to thousands of people. So seeing the reopening protests in May that erupted from all over the country, and realizing how we arrived at that place, to me, that's the film. And whatever happened after May only, I think, confirms our to the central themes and the thesis of the film. So I wasn't worried or wasn't thinking I need to track to see how it ends, because pretty much that period is what the film wanted to explore, the questions that became obvious during those months.
I want to ask about the editing of the film that you did alongside your husband, Mike Shade. Um, there's so much information that's being synthesized in this film. I was just watching some of it today, and even just the segment where you're looking at the reporting of deaths or coronavirus cases in New York City, and you've got sound bites, from the radio, day after day. So there's two sides to that. One is the incredible feat of information collecting and that you undertook, and then it's synthesizing that in the editing. Can you talk about both of those process?
I'm glad you recognize it, and I hope people seeing like a montage of like 5 seconds of voice is actually work of like a month of like 5 people. Um, from early on, the China part, I realized that there is a discrepancy between the official narrative and then the reality. And juxtaposing the two is always a goal to show what the government is saying, what the people are learning, and versus what is the reality. So from the China part, we're collecting every single piece of news from late um, November. From November, we look at the November, December 2019 to find the traces of what the government knew and when, and then huge, massive timeline of each day. We have a group of very, very talented young filmmakers working as archival researchers, assistant editors, and they themselves, they are, NYU documentary graduate, SVA graduate, graduate, like major students. They all have the skills in making their own films. I think several your students were your students at SVA too. They shoot, they edit, they are filmmakers themselves, but they're working on this. They're reviewing every single news from every single channel and make a timeline. January 1st, what did the officials say and what, when? And I think we have a museum. We could build a museum of a collective database. Seriously, like it's just a ton. And then, uh, you know, carving out of a timeline. And we have fact checkers because it's extremely important to get the timeline right and which day, what number, and what happened, who is set. You know, Anthony Fauci said it on March 10th not to wear a mask. It's different than if he had said it on February 10th. So those are all important. So we fact checked all of them and eventually selected what are the most crucial milestones included in the film.
Your film ends in January 2021, and now here we are 8 months later. With it coming out, and we're going through fresh cycles of trying to cope with COVID-19 and Delta variants and so forth. I wonder, with the gestation of this film, with it coming out now, if you think about the issues it brings up in any different way than when you finished it in January.
Um, Not really. I just hope that by now it's almost a year and a half from them, and people more than a year and a half, and then I hope people would be willing to look back and examine the issues and to start thinking in a reflective way, to start think about it in an active way, because we all experienced it, and I think sometimes it's hard to look at it, but I think it would help all of us to examine the issues and the actions that led us to where we are today.
Do you have a sense with your films Hooligan Sparrow and One Child Nation how much they get seen in an underground way in China, and if you have expectations of this film being seen in China?
I don't have the numbers, but I do remember when One Child Nation was released on Amazon. within days or weeks, there were pirated versions in China, and then several links come up, and each of those links had like 30,000 or more downloads, and then that would get shut down, and then another one would come up and equally would have very quick downloads amounts. So I don't know how many exactly people seen it. Um, and I certainly hope that people in China would be able to see in the same breath too.
When you say they get shut down,
A link would be taken out.
by, you assume, government censors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All their websites were monitored by the state censors, so there was no individuals who have the power to do that, or yeah, in China.
Yeah, have you been able to share in the same breath with the people who worked on it, or people who are in it, and what were those reactions like?
Um, People who worked on it felt, I think this probably is true with anybody who worked on a film, felt extremely gratifying to see the work and to see how it comes out, and felt a sense of pride that they contributed, and then felt it was true. Chinese people who sees the segments of themselves felt is very truthful, and um, in a way, and then some people we did show the full film because we are able to, the security reasons, that we were able to show it to several individuals, the full film. And some comments were really rewarding to me, that they said that this is a collective memory of people in Wuhan. And this is from the people in the film who lives in Wuhan, to say that they felt this is a collective memory.
I want to thank Nanfu Wang for speaking with me. Her new film, In the Same Breath, is now playing on HBO Max. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Norden-Swan, and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Nehausen. I'm Tom Powers. You can follow me on Twitter at THOMPowers. You can read our show notes and sign up for our newsletter at purenonfiction.net.